In the depths of the most ancient sacred texts and in the margins of official scriptures, there are celestial beings whose names are rarely echoed in modern temples. Among these, an enigmatic and powerful figure stands out, a being who inhabits the boundaries between worlds, capable of moving between the human and the divine with a freedom granted to no other. While archangels like Michael and Gabriel are widely celebrated and invoked, there is a celestial being whose nature defies traditional categories, whose power equals the divine, and whose story suggests that the boundaries between humanity and divinity may be thinner than we imagine. This being is Metatron, the only archangel allowed to sit on the celestial throne, the scribe who records every human action, the guardian of the cosmos' deepest secrets. His mere existence raises fundamental questions about the nature of the celestial hierarchy and the spiritual possibilities of human beings. After all, if a man can be elevated to heaven and transformed into one of the most powerful celestial beings, what are the real limits imposed on our own spiritual evolution? Have you ever wondered why certain spiritual knowledge remains hidden from public view, preserved only for those who venture beyond the boundaries of conventional religious traditions? Metatron represents exactly this kind of mystery, a celestial entity of extraordinary importance who nevertheless remains virtually unknown to most contemporary religious practitioners. His name doesn't echo in modern churches, synagogues, or mosques, despite his centrality in the oldest esoteric traditions. In the texts of the traditional Bible, the one we find on bookstore shelves and bedside tables, Metatron's presence is noticeably absent. You can leaf through Genesis, Exodus, the prophets, and the Gospels without ever finding a direct mention of this celestial being. This absence, however, is not accidental. It represents the complex choices made by ancient religious councils about which knowledge should be accessible to the masses and which should remain reserved for initiates into the deepest mysteries. To find Metatron, we need to venture into parallel traditions, the apocryphal texts, Jewish mystical manuscripts, and Kabbalistic revelations. It is there, on the margins of religious orthodoxy, that we discover a being of light whose importance rivals that of the better-known archangels. In Jewish mystical literature, especially in the Zohar and Sefer Heshalot, Metatron emerges as a central figure in the celestial hierarchy, not just as another angel among many, but as a being of unique rank. The title that immediately distinguishes him is that of celestial scribe, a function that places him in a unique position in the divine cosmos. Imagine a being whose responsibility it is to record every thought, every action, every choice made by every human being, not as a harsh judge, but as the impartial guardian of the universal record. According to the mystics, Metatron observes humanity with eyes that do not condemn, but deeply understand the complexity of the human experience. Even more surprising is the unique privilege granted to Metatron, to sit on the heavenly throne itself. In the rigid hierarchy of spiritual beings described in the Abrahamic traditions, such an honor is completely unprecedented. Even the most powerful archangels stand eternally in the divine presence, in a posture of constant reverence. What kind of being would receive such an extraordinary honor? What unique qualities would justify such proximity to the Creator himself? The answer to this question leads us to one of Metatron's most fascinating characteristics, something that radically differentiates him from all other angelic beings. While religious traditions usually describe angels as beings created directly by God, destined from the beginning to be heavenly messengers and servants, Metatron has a radically different origin. In many of the ancient esoteric traditions, he wasn't born an angel. He was a transformed human being. This notion fundamentally challenges the conventional religious worldview, which tends to establish clear and insurmountable barriers between categories of existence. Humans are humans, angels are angels, and the separation between these orders of being seems absolute and immutable. However, Metatron's story suggests something profoundly revolutionary. That spiritual evolution can transcend these apparently fixed categories, that a human being can, through their devotion and wisdom, be elevated to a state of being that transcends the limitations of mortality. In esoteric texts, Metatron is often described as carrying an aura of indescribable light, emanating energy at frequencies that defy ordinary human comprehension. Visionary accounts speak of a being crowned with thousands of luminous crowns, each representing a different aspect of universal knowledge. His presence is described as both overwhelming and welcoming, inspiring both reverence and comfort in those rare mystics who have managed to perceive him in altered states of consciousness. Another fascinating peculiarity is Metatron's connection with universal knowledge. Unlike other archangels, whose functions tend to be more specific, Michael as a celestial warrior, Gabriel as a messenger, Raphael as a healer, Metatron is often depicted as the guardian of all cosmic secrets, the being who understands the underlying patterns of creation. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have access to such comprehensive knowledge? What it would be like to perceive, all at once, all the connections between all things? Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Metatron is precisely this unique position he occupies. Neither totally human nor totally angelic, but a transcendent synthesis of both. As a being who has already inhabited the flesh, he intimately understands the struggles, pains, and joys of human existence. As a being elevated to the highest heavenly realms, he has access to the divine perspective. This duality makes him the ideal mediator between the worlds, the perfect bridge between the divine and the human. The transformation of a human being into an archangel represents one of the most extraordinary and least known narratives in ancient spiritual literature. To understand the true nature of Metatron, we need to turn our attention to the enigmatic Book of Enoch, a text considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, but which was excluded from the Western biblical canon at the Council of Laodicea in 364 AD. Why was a text of such importance removed from the official scriptures? What potentially disturbing knowledge did it contain that justified its suppression? The patriarch Enoch, mentioned briefly in the book of Genesis as the seventh descendant of Adam and father of Methuselah, is given only a short passage in the canonical text. Enoch walked with God and was no longer found, for God took him for himself. This cryptic phrase, almost casual in the biblical narrative, hides behind it one of the most extraordinary transformations described in mystical texts. The Book of Enoch dramatically expands this narrative, describing the patriarch's heavenly journey in vivid detail. According to these ancient writings, Enoch did not experience death like other human beings. Instead, he was physically raptured into the heavens while still alive, taken through the 7 celestial spheres on a journey of cosmic initiation. With each level he ascended, Enoch was instructed in the divine mysteries, acquiring layers of knowledge that transcended normal human understanding. Imagine the experience of an ordinary human being progressively initiated into the innermost secrets of creation, every barrier of perception dissolving before his spiritual eyes. On reaching the 7th heaven, the highest celestial realm, Enoch underwent a radical transformation. The texts describe how his physical body was progressively transmuted into a body of light, his mortal cells being replaced by luminous substance. This metamorphosis was not just physical, but represented an integral elevation of his being to a transcendent state. The angel Metatron emerged from this transformation not as a completely new entity, but as a transfigured Enoch, preserving his essential identity and human memories, but now inhabiting a much broader spectrum of existence. The mystical texts associate this transformation with a divine ritual in which God himself renamed Enoch as Metatron. The act of receiving a new name represents, in esoteric traditions, not just a change of identity, but a fundamental alteration in the vibrational essence of being. When the Infinite One pronounced the name Metatron, it gave the ancient patriarch a new frequency of existence, allowing him to operate in dimensions beyond conventional time and space. One of the most significant consequences of this transformation was Metatron's newly acquired ability to serve as a mediator between realities. Having fully experienced the human condition and now inhabiting the heavenly realms, he occupies a unique position in the divine cosmos. Have you ever wondered how it would be possible to translate transcendent spiritual truths into a language understandable to human beings? This is precisely Metatron's function, to serve as a translator between the infinite and the finite, between the eternal and the temporal. As guardian of cosmic secrets, Metatron received knowledge of all dimensions of creation. Kabbalistic texts describe how he understands the mathematical patterns underlying the universe, the music of the celestial spheres, the genetic codes of life, and the temporal cycles governing cosmic evolution. Most importantly, it holds the knowledge of the true purpose of human existence, information considered so powerful that it should only be revealed gradually, as the collective consciousness is prepared to receive it. Particularly fascinating is Metatron's role as the guardian of time. Having transcended the limitations of linear existence, he can simultaneously perceive past, present, and future, not as separate moments, but as aspects of an eternal now. This knowledge allows him to guide humanity through the great evolutionary cycles, inspiring advances in collective consciousness precisely when they are needed. How many times in human history have revolutionary insights come seemingly out of nowhere, completely transforming our understanding of reality? The transition from Enoch to Metatron represents not just an extraordinary individual story, but a profound archetype of the possibility of human transcendence. In many esoteric traditions, this narrative is interpreted as a symbol of the evolutionary potential latent in every human being, not necessarily to be physically elevated to heaven during life, but to transcend the limitations of separate identity and experience states of unified consciousness. What would happen if we saw the story of Enoch not as an isolated event from the distant past, but as a future possibility for the collective evolution of humanity? In the Kabbalistic tradition, Metatron is often referred to as the sacred youth, a paradoxical title for a being of immeasurable age. This epithet reflects the quality of constant renewal and transformation associated with him. Although ancient in wisdom, his energy remains perpetually fresh, creative, and innovative. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson we can draw from Enoch's transformation, that spiritual evolution does not lead to a static state of perfection, but to a continuous expansion of creative possibilities. At the heart of Jewish mystical traditions, particularly in the Talmud and the Merkabah literature, we find one of Metatron's most controversial and fascinating characteristics: his unique relationship with the divine throne. According to these ancient texts, Metatron is the only being in the entire celestial hierarchy, apart from God himself, who has received authorization to sit on a throne in the heavenly realm. To understand the revolutionary significance of this statement, we need to contextualize the symbolic importance of the throne in the Abrahamic traditions. In Jewish, Islamic, and Christian mystical cosmologies, the throne represents not just a seat of authority, but the very ontological center of creation, the point from which all reality emanates. Sitting on a heavenly throne means actively participating in the cosmic government, exercising an authority that transcends natural laws and participating in the ongoing sustenance of existence. What implications arise when we consider that a being who was previously human now shares this level of power and responsibility? Talmudic literature describes a particularly intriguing episode known as the Ahair incident. According to this narrative, Rabbi Elisha ben Abuya, later known as Ahair, the Other, a title reflecting his exclusion from the rabbinical community, had a mystical vision in which he observed Metatron sitting in the sky. This vision led him to a heretical conclusion: perhaps there are two powers in heaven, which fundamentally contradicts strict Jewish monotheism. This story reveals not only an obscure theological detail, but the profound disturbance that Metatron's unique position caused even among the most sophisticated mystics. The conflict was not limited to earthly circles. The mystical texts describe how Metatron's elevation caused confusion and even revolt among the angelic hosts. Imagine the scene: beings who since the beginning of time have stood in perpetual reverence before the divine throne, permanently standing in a posture of eternal service, witnessing an ancient human receiving privileges that were eternally denied to them. The texts relate angelic questions. If this is the descendant of those who were expelled from Eden, why does he receive such honor? The answer to this celestial controversy came in the form of a divine clarification. Metatron was given permission to sit not as a sign of equality with the Creator, but because of his specific function as cosmic recorder. As the scribe who documents all human actions, thoughts, and choices in the Great Book of Life, Metatron needed a position that would allow him to observe and record with absolute precision. This explanation, although it temporarily calmed the celestial hierarchy, did not completely eliminate the theological ambiguities of his extraordinary position. Particularly intriguing is the title given to Metatron in some mystical texts, the Lesser YHWH, YHWH Hakatan in Hebrew. YHWH, the sacred tetragrammaton, represents the unpronounceable name of God in Judaism, considered so holy that only the high priest could pronounce it, just once a year, in the Holy of Holies. That a being other than the Creator himself should receive a title that incorporates this sacred name represents one of the most audacious theological claims found in esoteric literature. Some scholars suggest that this title indicates that Metatron serves as a visible manifestation of the invisible divinity, a perceptible expression of the imperceptible. Later Kabbalistic literature further elaborated on this unique relationship, describing Metatron as the lesser face, Zir Anpin, of the divine, in contrast to the greater face, Erich Anpin, that remains eternally beyond comprehension. In this mystical conception, Metatron is not simply an exalted servant, but a direct expression of the infinite itself, adapted to interact with the lower realms of creation. When we think of the mystics who contemplated these ideas centuries ago, we can't help but marvel at the philosophical sophistication of their cosmological visions. Some medieval esoteric texts go even further, suggesting that Metatron not only sits on a throne close to the divine, but that he occasionally serves as temporary ruler of the cosmos. These traditions describe periods in which the infinite partially withdraws from manifest creation in cosmic breathing cycles, leaving Metatron as guardian of the universal order during these intervals. Is this a metaphorical elaboration of complex theological concepts, or could it reflect authentic intuitions about the administrative cycles of the universe? The implications of this unique relationship between Metatron and the divine throne extended into medieval magical and contemplative practices. Angelic magic manuscripts from medieval Europe often invoke Metatron precisely because of this unique proximity to creative power. The logic was clear: if you want a petition to reach the highest level of cosmic authority, better to direct it through the one who has privileged access to the throne. This practice reflects not just superstition, but a sophisticated understanding of spiritual economy. The idea that there is an administrative hierarchy in the cosmos that can be navigated effectively. For contemporary mystics, Metatron's relationship with the divine throne continues to inspire deep speculation about the nature of ultimate reality. Some interpret this narrative as an elegant metaphor for the concept that evolved human consciousness can tune in directly to the frequency of creative cosmic consciousness. Others see it as an archetype of the possibility of human participation in the universal creative process, not as passive creatures, but as active co-creators in partnership with the divine. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of this narrative is what it suggests about our own evolutionary potential. If we accept the premise that Metatron was originally Enoch, a human being like us, then his elevation to the heavenly throne represents an archetypal possibility open to all of humanity, not necessarily as isolated individuals, but as an evolving species. Could we be witnessing, in our own age of rapid transformation, the first stages of a collective evolution towards a state of consciousness closer to that which mystics attribute to Metatron? Among the countless functions attributed to Metatron in esoteric texts, perhaps the most fundamental is his role as celestial scribe. Imagine a being whose consciousness expands enough to perceive and record every action, every thought, every creative or destructive impulse of every human being who has ever existed. Mystical texts describe Metatron sitting before the Great Book of Life, a cosmic metaphor for the Akashic record, inscribing with absolute precision not only external acts, but internal motivations, spiritual growths, and setbacks. Unlike popular depictions of a harsh judge evaluating souls, Metatron is described as a compassionate and impartial observer, deeply understanding the challenges and complexities of the human experience. This scribal function transcends mere passive recording. In Jewish mysticism, the act of writing is considered fundamentally creative. The letters don't just describe reality, but actively participate in shaping it. When Metatron inscribes something in the Book of Life, he is not simply documenting what already exists, but participating in the crystallization and stabilization of potentials that fluctuate between possibility and manifestation. Have you ever thought about how the simple act of articulating or writing down a personal experience seems to give it more defined form and meaning? This common intuition mirrors, on a tiny scale, the cosmic function attributed to Metatron. Metatron's connection with sacred language is particularly evident in his association with the Hebrew alphabet. According to Kabbalistic texts, each of the 22 Hebrew letters represents not just a sound, but a specific vibrational frequency that participated in the formation of the material universe. Metatron is described as the guardian of these primordial linguistic codes, understanding not only their surface meaning, but the mathematical and geometric harmonies that each symbol encapsulates. When medieval mystics meditated deeply on individual Hebrew letters, they sought to attune themselves to this metatronic wisdom, accessing layers of meaning normally inaccessible to ordinary consciousness. This relationship with sacred language naturally extends to the Sephirotic tree of life, the Kabbalistic diagram that maps the emanations of divine consciousness. In many esoteric traditions, Metatron is considered the guardian of this cosmic map, the one who understands how energies flow from Keter, the supreme crown, through the various spherotes to Maketh, the material realm. More than a theoretical diagram, the Tree of Life was seen by Kabbalists as a practical tool for navigating consciousness through different states and dimensions. Metatron, having personally traveled the journey from matter to light, serves as the ideal guide for those seeking to expand their perception beyond the limitations of the separated ego. Particularly fascinating is Metatron's association with the 72 names of God, a sequence of angelic codes derived from 3 verses in Exodus. According to Kabbalistic tradition, when these names are properly pronounced or contemplated, they can open portals to higher dimensions of consciousness and manifest tangible effects in the material world. Metatron is described as the administrator of these codes of power, determining when and how this knowledge can be revealed to humanity. Many medieval magical texts include specific invocations to Metatron precisely in order to gain access to these transformative codes. At the heart of all these linguistic and mathematical associations is the famous cube of Metatron, one of the most important sacred geometric symbols in esoteric traditions. This complex three-dimensional structure, made up of 13 circles connected by straight lines, is considered a representation of the fundamental matrix of physical creation. Mystics describe the cube not just as a symbol, but as an active energy portal, a tool for attuning human consciousness to the patterns underlying the fabric of reality. By meditating on this form, the ancient texts say, it is possible to experience directly how Metatron perceives the interconnectedness of all things. Metatron's association with sacred magic derives naturally from his role as mediator between worlds and guardian of creative codes. In the Western magical tradition, especially in medieval and Renaissance grimoires, Metatron is often invoked as a protector and amplifier of magical operations. Unlike entities associated with specific goals, wealth, love, protection, Metatron is called upon when the practitioner seeks to raise the vibrational frequency of any operation, align personal intentions with wider cosmic purposes, or gain clarity about the wisdom or folly of a particular course of action. European alchemical texts also make veiled references to Metatron as the Mercury of the sages, not the ordinary chemical element, but the transformative principle that allows for the transmutation of consciousness and matter. Genuine alchemy was never primarily about turning lead into physical gold, but about the transformation of human consciousness from heavy and dense states to more refined and luminous ones. The Enoch/Metatron story itself represents the perfect archetypal example of this alchemical transformation, the elevation of the human to the divine through a process of progressive refinement. In the contemplative practices of various mystical traditions, the invocation of Metatron is specifically associated with the development of mental clarity. Considering his role as an impartial cosmic observer, capable of perceiving all dimensions of any situation without emotional or conceptual distortions, it is understandable why mystics would seek to align themselves with his frequency when faced with complex decisions or spiritual dilemmas. Have you ever experienced moments of surprising clarity when you suddenly perceive a situation from a broader perspective, free from the usual limitations of your personal point of view? Perhaps the most profound aspect of Metatron's role as guardian of sacred language is what he reveals to us about the fundamental nature of reality. If we accept the premise that the material universe emerged from vibratory patterns encoded in primordial symbols, then our very ability to articulate, write, and manipulate symbols is not just a communication tool, but a direct participation in the ongoing creative process. When we write, speak, or think with clarity and conscious intention, we are engaging, on a microcosmic scale, the same creative power that Metatron administers on a macrocosmic scale. In the depths of Hebrew mystical texts, particularly in the Zohar and the Sefer Hekhalot, we find vivid descriptions of Metatron as the guardian of the veil that separates different levels of reality. This veil is not conceived as a solid barrier, but as a semi-permeable membrane between dimensions, regulating the flow of consciousness and energy between the higher and lower realms. Imagine a cosmic border where realities with completely different physical and metaphysical laws meet, a threshold that requires a guardian capable of understanding and navigating both sides. Who better for this role than a being who once inhabited the material dimension and now exists in the celestial frequency? As guardian of this interdimensional border, Metatron serves as both protector and facilitator of passage. On the one hand, he prevents energies or entities of incompatible frequencies from invading realms for which they are not prepared, a crucial function considering the potential damage of premature encounters between consciousnesses of radically different orders. On the other hand, it facilitates the transmission of light, knowledge, and inspiration from the higher to the lower realms, carefully calibrating the intensity of these transmissions so that they can be received without overloading the receiving systems. This guardian function is particularly evident in Metatron's role as a guide for souls in transition. According to early Jewish and Christian mystical traditions, when a human consciousness leaves the physical body, it finds itself temporarily disoriented, unable to fully understand its new situation or navigate the subtle realms. Metatron is described as the first guide that many souls encounter in this liminal state, helping them to process their earthly experience and preparing them for higher realms. Have you ever thought about what this first encounter after physical death would be like? This moment of reorientation in a radically expanded reality? Accounts of near-death experiences from different cultures and times often mention a being of extraordinary light who serves as an initial guide, a presence that combines absolute authority with compassionate understanding. Although these experiences are filtered through the cultural and religious contexts of the individuals, the consistent patterns suggest a deep archetype that corresponds to the mystical descriptions of Metatron. Particularly notable is the frequently reported feeling of being in the presence of a being who knows the person completely, understanding every aspect of their life without judgment, but with a clarity that allows for no self-deception. As the guardian of dimensional portals, Metatron also oversees what we might call access points scattered throughout the material cosmos, places where the veil between worlds is naturally thinner. Esoteric traditions from various cultures identify certain geographical places as particularly conducive to interdimensional communication. Specific mountains, confluences of water currents, ancient rock formations, or locations aligned with particular celestial configurations. Mystical texts suggest that Metatron monitors these portals, protecting them from misuse while facilitating their activation during appropriate cosmic periods. In the contemplative practice of various mystical traditions, Metatron is invoked specifically to help the practitioner expand their perception beyond the normal limitations of physical consciousness. Unlike trance states where ordinary consciousness is completely replaced, the Metatronic presence is associated with hyperclarity states where normal perception is preserved but greatly expanded. Contemplatives describe the sensation of maintaining full consciousness while simultaneously perceiving multiple layers of reality that are normally invisible, as if the veil that normally obscures our vision became momentarily transparent. A particularly intriguing aspect of Metatron's function as guardian of the veil relates to the transmission of divine light to lower dimensions. Kabbalistic texts describe how the pure light of the divine source is too intense to be received directly by beings of a denser vibrational frequency. Metatron serves as a cosmic transformer, modulating this energy so that it can be absorbed progressively by consciousnesses at different evolutionary stages. When mystics and visionaries from different traditions report encounters with divine light, what they often experience is not the direct source, but this light already modulated by Metatron so that it is comprehensible to human perception. Accounts of encounters with Metatron in mystical states often emphasize the extraordinary quality of his visual presence. Unlike other angelic entities who can manifest with relatively anthropomorphic appearances, Metatron is consistently described as a being of complex luminous geometry, a multidimensional pattern of light that defies ordinary visual comprehension. Visionaries report interlocking geometric forms in constant movement and transformation, emitting chromatic frequencies that transcend the normal visible spectrum. Could this extraordinary appearance be an attempt by the human mind to interpret the manifestation of a being that exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions? Metatron's association with the interdimensional veil has profound implications for those who seek spiritual truths. It suggests that deeper knowledge does not come primarily from external sources or intellectual accumulation, but from a progressive expansion of perception beyond conventional limitations. Mystics who invoke Metatron are not so much looking for new information, but for a clarification of inner vision that allows them to perceive what has always been present but usually remains invisible. How different would our collective experience of reality be if a significant number of people could regularly perceive beyond the veil that Metatron holds? In our contemporary age, marked by rapid transformations in collective consciousness and the collapse of old paradigms of perception, many spiritual teachers suggest that the interdimensional veil is becoming thinner globally. If we accept this premise, Metatron's role as guardian and guide becomes particularly relevant to our evolutionary moment. As more people spontaneously experience expanded states of consciousness or perceptions that transcend conventional materialism, the need for wise guidance through these new landscapes of consciousness becomes ever more crucial. In the margins of apocalyptic texts and in the oral traditions preserved by mystics of various lineages, we find intriguing references to Metatron's role in the final events of the current cosmic era. Unlike the literal interpretations of the apocalypse that dominate certain contemporary religious circles, these esoteric visions describe not a catastrophic destruction of the material world, but a fundamental transformation in the vibrational quality of existence. At the center of this cosmic metamorphosis, Metatron is often described as a key agent, not just as a witness, but as an active facilitator of the transition between eras. Jewish mystical manuscripts, particularly those influenced by the Merkaba tradition, describe Metatron as the bearer of the final trumpet, not a literal instrument, but a transformative frequency that will recalibrate the collective consciousness. According to these visions, when certain cosmic cycles reach their natural culmination, Metatron will transmit an energetic impulse through all dimensions of existence, serving as a catalyst for an evolutionary leap in planetary consciousness. Have you ever wondered why so many prophetic traditions, despite their cultural and theological differences, converge in the expectation of a fundamental transformation in human experience? Particularly intriguing are the texts that associate Metatron with the progressive dissolution of the barriers between dimensions of existence. Visionaries from various traditions describe a future where the rigid separation between the material and the spiritual, between the visible and the invisible, becomes increasingly permeable. Metatron, as the original guardian of the veil between worlds, would oversee this progressive integration, ensuring that it takes place in harmony with the evolutionary capacity of human consciousness. These visions suggest not the end of the material world, but its transfiguration through interpenetration with higher frequencies of reality. In Christian esoteric traditions, especially those preserved in Gnostic and alchemical currents, we find veiled references to Metatron as the forerunner of the return of the Christ, a concept interpreted not literally, but as the awakening of Christ consciousness in collective humanity. The parallel between these two figures is profound. Just as Enoch was transformed into Metatron, transcending the limitations of ordinary human existence, the collective human consciousness would be progressively transformed into a state that mystics call the body of light. Could this process already be perceptible in our time through the growing interest in expanded states of consciousness and transformative practices? A fascinating aspect of the prophecies related to Metatron is his association with a future synthesis between science and spirituality. Visionary texts suggest that, under Metatronic influence, humanity will gradually develop a unified understanding of reality, where the most advanced scientific discoveries and the deepest mystical intuitions will converge in an integrated paradigm. The first signs of this synthesis are already perceptible in the growing dialogue between quantum physics and contemplative traditions, in research into non-ordinary states of consciousness, and in scientific studies of ancient meditative practices. In the Kabbalistic tradition, Metatron is specifically associated with the collective evolutionary destiny of humanity through the concept of Adam Kadmon, the primordial or archetypal human being who represents the full evolutionary potential of the species. According to this concept, each individual human being contains a spark of this potential, but its full realization will only happen collectively, when humanity as a whole reaches a state of integration and harmonization. Metatron, having personally completed this evolutionary journey, serves as a model and catalyst for this collective realization. Descriptions of Metatron as a bridge between God and ascended humanity take on particular significance when we consider the concept of the evolution of consciousness. Unlike Darwinian biological evolution, which operates primarily through random genetic mutations and natural selection over vast periods of time, the evolution of consciousness can experience quantum leaps when appropriate conditions converge. Visionary texts suggest that we are approaching one of these evolutionary bifurcation points, where Metatronic influence facilitates an acceleration in the development of collective human perception. This evolutionary perspective raises fascinating questions about Metatron's role in relation to the traditional celestial hierarchy. Some texts suggest that, by assuming functions normally reserved only for the divine, Metatron represents a cosmic precedent, not an isolated anomaly, but the first example of an emerging pattern where the rigid distinction between the human and the divine progressively dissolves. This perspective contrasts radically with conventional theologies that insist on the eternal separation between creator and creature. Could the story of Metatron suggest that the ultimate purpose of creation is not the perpetual worship of an eternally separate being, but the progressive integration and unification of all consciousness? Critics of this view, particularly for more orthodox religious traditions, express concern that Metatron may represent an inappropriate usurpation of divine prerogatives. This perspective reverberates ancient narratives about the war in heaven and the fall of Lucifer, interpreted not literally, but as archetypes of cosmic dynamics. The fundamental question becomes, is there an essential difference between expanding towards divinity through conscious transformation, the Metatron path, versus trying to grasp divine power through individualized willpower, the Luciferian path? This subtle distinction represents one of the deepest spiritual questions that confront genuine seekers. The resolution of these apparent tensions may lie in the concept of non-duality, present in many mature mystical traditions. From this perspective, the separation between the human and the divine was never absolutely real, but a functional illusion necessary for certain stages of cosmic development. Metatron, by transcending this apparent separation without losing his essential identity, demonstrates the possibility of integration without dissolution, a unity that preserves and celebrates diversity rather than nullifying it. Could we be witnessing, in our own era, the first collective stages of the same process that Enoch experienced individually millennia ago? Perhaps the most transformative aspect of the Metatronic narrative is what it reveals about our own collective evolutionary potential. At a time marked by profound transformations in human consciousness, the collapse of outdated paradigms, and the emergence of new possibilities of perception, the figure of Metatron emerges as a powerful symbol of integration and transcendence. He reminds us that the boundaries we perceive as fixed and immutable, between matter and spirit, between human and divine, between past and future, are actually permeable membranes through which we can learn to consciously navigate, continually expanding the horizons of our experience and understanding. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.